A lesson from Pope Francis. Hello, everybody. I'm Parker Pruitt, and thank you for joining me on the Inseparable Podcast. Well, by now, I'm sure you've all heard the sad news that Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88. And I wanted to do sort of a short video tribute to him because while I'm not Catholic, and you might not be Catholic either, maybe you are, maybe you aren't, that's fine. I welcome all believers. Um, I don't endorse everything he believed or said in his life, as I don't endorse everything anybody believes, right? Except for Jesus, and right. but I'd be foolish not to say I didn't learn anything from Pope Francis, and I think he got a lot of flack, a lot of unwarranted hate because of the love he showed, of the unconditional love and compassion he showed, and I think that's much and sorely needed in our world today, especially in the Western world. I think we're falling into this trap of an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Justice must prevail. The hand of justice must prevail. And um, justice comes, right. Sins have their own punishment baked into the cake. It's not our job to judge, though. It's not our job to enforce that justice of God, right. So I think that's what Pope Francis had right, was our job is just to love, right. Our job is to show love and be God's expression of love in the earth, because it's sorely needed. It's sorely needed. You can never give too much love and compassion, and I'm all for that, no matter who it is. So, like I said, I wanted to do this little video tribute to him, um, because I learned from him. I learned a few things from him, and I think it's commendable for him to be the leader of the entire Catholic Church, right? And uh, to kind of go against the grain a little bit, go against tradition, go against orthodox beliefs and doctrine a little bit, and just be a little more just compassionate, inclusive toward the body of Christ. And I'm all for that. Um, you know, I'm. I understand, traditions are traditions for a reason because they've worked, but at the same time, um, we do have to have a balance of that love and compassion too. So, one thing I did like about Pope Francis, getting into the weeds of this thing, is his encouragement to give to the poor. I think that's really been lost. We've been kind of conditioned to, just pass the person on the street, that's begging, the beggar on the street, because we see it so often, right? But back in Jesus's day, they were probably even more prevalent, right? The wealth disparity is probably even more prevalent, and you know, so if Jesus taught it, why should we forget it, right? So who are we to forget that, right? Um, you can't just cling on to everything you own, as much as that goes against the grain of you know postmodern thought, and um, especially here in North America, like that's not really socially acceptable anymore. Like what's yours is yours. A hard work pays off, which all that's can be true. Two things can be true at once, though, right? You can still give. God loves a cheerful giver, right? So give out of the abundance of your heart, right? And that's what I liked about Pope Francis. He always talked about, even the small acts of kindness has a big impact, right? It can make a big difference in somebody's life. And I think of the story found in Mark chapter 12, verse 41 through 44, when and I'll just read it. It says, "And he sat down, Jesus sat down opposite the treasury and watched the people putting money into the offering box. Many rich people put in large sums, And a poor widow came and put in 2 small copper coins, which make a penny. And he called his disciples to him and said to them, Truly, I say to you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the offering box. For they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, has put in everything she had, all she had to live on. I'm not the judge. I'm not the judge here, but um, you could see these super wealthy men and women, giving writing $10,000 checks, $100,000 checks, whatever, to charity, and they might be doing it for the wrong reasons. They might be doing it for tax breaks, or whatever, um, which it's their business. But and all at the end of the day, it does go to a good cause, most of the time. So that's great and all. But God looks at the heart. God looks inward at your heart. So ask yourself, do a little self reflection. Am I giving for the right reasons, right? Am I giving out of the abundance of my heart? Um, while those people might be giving huge checks, you might not be able to do that. But, you know, are you able to give out of your abundance? You might not have much, but what do you have to give? And it might not just be money. It might be our time, our resources, our knowledge, our wisdom. We need to be able to impart those things onto the next generation and those who are hungry and lacking that in that category. Um, you know, um, Sometimes I get caught up with my own kids, and those are my responsibilities, right? My son and my daughter and my wife, they're my responsibility. So I'm investing 90% of my time in my family, which is fine, I think. But at the end of the day, I've got to also be able to, you know, go outside of my own household, and make an impact on the world too, and make an influence on the world. Just like, this podcast. Um, I don't have to do this, and I really don't get that many views, which is fine. I wish I got more, but that's not the point of this video and this podcast altogether. The point is to impart wisdom on, if it's one person, it's one person. I want God to be able to trust me with the little that He's given me, right? And so there's people that I've been able to minister to as a police officer. One person comes to mind is a boy named Lucas. He's, a 16, 17-year-old kid. And, just being able to um, pour into his life. I've been to his house a couple times on some calls, just him being a little unruly or whatever, but being able to go outside um, on my off time and spend time with him and work with him and pour into his life, take him out to a ball game, things like that. Um, I think that's what I'm getting at is, sharing my time, sharing my knowledge, sharing my just resources, wisdom, whatever you want to call it. I'm 15 years older. I have more life experience than him. So just being able to, encourage him, be an ear for him because he lost his father when he was 3 years old. So, just, being a support for him amongst other people too. That's an example of how you can be, an impact on the world, right? With what little you have. I'm not rich. I don't have a lot of money. Um, and right now, honestly, I've got some debt I need to pay. I'm starting to pay off, so I don't have a lot of money to give. But what I do have is time, right? We all have time, and we need to be good stewards of that time, good managers of that time. So maybe it's, carving out 30 minutes of your day and going to, just finding somebody. You all know that person, right? It might be a cousin, a friend, um, a girlfriend's child, a boyfriend's child, whoever it is, um, you know, give that person a call. Hey, I'm thinking about you. Hope everything's good. Give that person a word of encouragement. That's a currency. Encouragement is currency in the kingdom, right? Love is a currency, is the currency in the kingdom of heaven, right? So use what you have to glorify him, whatever little amount that is. Use it to glorify him, and he will always make it increase. um, just like Jesus on 2 separate occasions, made 5 fishes and 2 loaves of bread increase and multiply for thousands of people, probably upwards of 20,000 people. That's what we have to do, right? We have to trust him with what little we have and give what little we have so he can make it multiply. But you have to put your faith in him and let him multiply it. But you have to start it. You have to start with what little you have. He's not just going to give you, well, he might, I don't know. I'm not God, but in my experience, he doesn't just give you everything all at once. Most of the time you have to show him that he can trust you with what little you have, right? So practice with what little you have. If you have $5 to give somebody, go out and bless somebody, with a $5 bill. That I've done that in the past. Not to sound conceited or anything, but I remember when I was 13, 14 years old. Always, I had my faults, but I always had a heart to give, and I appreciate my parents for instilling that into me. But I'd get like $5 on a gift card. I won't tell anybody about it, and I'd put it in somebody's mailbox, or I'd write something and give it to somebody. $5. Hey, that might be a dozen eggs today. That's valuable. That's a gallon of gas in California. So do what you can with what you have. Right. That's the story. I also came across in my, just, you know, recollecting a little bit about the Pope and his charitable heart. Um, I researched this video that I remember seeing back in 2018 when this like 6 or 7 year old boy was trying to ask him a question, and he was too scared. And I'm going to link the video into the description if you're interested in watching. I really want you guys to watch this video. It's a tearjerker, man. I bawled when I watched this video. I had to just dry off my eyes before this video because I was watching it again. And man, it's so impactful. But it's when the boy asked if his atheist dad, who just passed away, a few days ago, if his dad was in heaven, but his dad was an atheist, right? So, the world is probably telling this kid, like, oh, your dad's in hell, So I thought this was so profound. The Pope showed Christ in that moment. And I don't want to spoil it, but go watch it for yourself. But, at the end of the day, he said, you told me, and the kid was too scared to ask his question over the mic, so he went up and buried his head in his chest, in the Pope's chest, and he just like a grandpa, he took him in and he said, "What's your question?" And he told him, and he said, my father, he baptized me and my 4 siblings, or whatever, and so the Pope commended his father for that. He said, as an atheist, if your dad baptized you, like that shows what's really in his heart, and God looks at the heart. And also, the fact that your father, that you say your father is a good father, says a lot. It's one thing for you to call yourself a good father, but if your kids call you a good father, they're going to tell the truth, right? Kids don't lie. Kids, and those tears didn't lie. That dad was a good dad, and that's what his responsibility was in this earth, was to be a good father to his kids, and it sounded like he was. And I just commended the Pope for comforting and consoling that kid. It just brought tears to my eye. But that's what love is, right? That's beautiful. It's a beautiful picture. He had the opportunity to squash that kid's faith and say, "Your dad, sorry, bud. My theology is telling me that, and a doctrine over here is telling me that your dad's in hell. You didn't believe, you didn't profess Christ. Um, he's going to be separated from the Lord forever." He could have just went all kinds of crazy on him, but instead he just said, your dad's a good dad, and that's your answer. God is a good father. You think he's going to let a good child, go too far from him and separate from him? No, that's your answer. So I've really appreciated that. Um, and that story reminds me of what Jesus tells us about his new commandment. Jesus tells us in John chapter 13, verses 34 and 35, he says, "A new commandment I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. By this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another." I knew that Pope Francis was of Christ because the love he showed. That's a perfect example of that new commandment. The new commandment is to love one another as Jesus has loved. Not just love your neighbor as yourself, but go above that. Love as Jesus loved. Jesus said, "Forgive them," right? Forgive those Roman soldiers for killing me. Forgive the Jews who turned me over to, you know, the soldiers to be killed and crucified. Forgive them, for they know not what they are doing. That's transcending loving people as you love yourself. That's loving as Jesus is loving. You're forgiving. You're pouring out it from yourself. So that's what I really commended and appreciated about Pope Francis. Once again, I don't endorse everything the Pope or popes believe and preach, whatever. But you chew the grapes and you spit out the seeds, right? You take what you want and you leave the rest, right? Yeah, I thought he was a very good man, and I'm gonna miss him as our Pope, and I pray that we have another good one gonna be elected. And once again, I'm not Catholic, but hey, they're a member of the body of Christ. While I don't recognize them as my authority, I recognize Jesus Christ alone as on the throne. I do believe that the Pope has a great influence on America and on the world, and so it's nice to see somebody who actually shows Christ in that position and just showing humility and love. So thank you all for joining me today. I hope this message blesses you in some way. God bless you all.